Enneagram and personality types, but as always, let's start with the word of prayer. Dear Jesus, thank you for this morning. Thank you again, as always, for the men who wake up a little bit earlier than they probably want to come be better husbands, fathers, and again, spiritual leaders of our community. It's cool to hear the buzz in this room this morning. It's great to feel the energy, and we know you'll be with us. Be with David today as he talks about some things that can be pretty in depth. So have him say what we need to hear and have us listen to what needs to be said. We ask these things in your name. Amen. So quick little, I wouldn't say diversion from the book that Nick talked about yesterday. It's in concert or in complement to the book. Today Dave's going to walk us through probably a personality test or personality type that you probably haven't heard before. I'm sure you guys have heard of like the DISC or some other popular ones. This is one that's a little newer, but I think more fundamental and more expansive to how many personalities there actually are out there. So I'm not going to take any more of your time. If you want to do your intro, that'd be great. But without further ado, Dave Orcutt.
All right, so I get to be the guinea pig here. We're going to try a few different things. We had the card thing. I actually have a handout this time, so I'm going to start it over here. If you guys can work it around, that would be awesome. Then we also got this microphone working, so we're going to give that a try. I know sometimes it's kind of hard to hear for everybody.
It's too loud.
So I am Dave Orcutt, and the season that we're trying to build here is really around the topic of men of action. And so I think that this topic in particular, I'm pretty passionate about this topic. I think it's actionable. It's a step that we all can take if we want to start moving in the direction of being men of action. And so I'll just dive right in. There we go. So who am I? I've met most of you before, but I'm Dave Orcutt. I've been married for 14 years. I have 2 kids. I'm an aerospace engineer. But none of those things really define me, or at least they shouldn't. And for a while, I sort of felt like they did. But really, who am I? Who am I at my core? Why do I get up in the morning? What motivates me? What keeps me going? That's sort of the question that I've been struggling with over, I'd say, the past 2-3 years. And the Enneagram has helped me better define that about myself. It's helped my spouse, my wife, better define that about herself. And then also knowing each other's personality types, we've been able to use that really over the last 6 months or so. I feel like it's made a dramatic change, a dramatic improvement in our marriage. And so I'm not an expert on any of this stuff by any means. And some of you might be super familiar with the Enneagram. I don't want to disappoint you. I have 20 minutes, and so this is going to be a really high-level overview. We've got a lot of content to cover. That's where the handout comes in. So there are a few slides in here that basically go into the 9 different Enneagram types that you have sitting in front of you, and it's double-sided. And so, I am going to read through a little bit on those slides, but really, in order to make it a little bit more digestible, that's what the handout is for, and we can kind of use those as guides during the small group discussions if we need to. So I'm sure most of you are familiar with a few of the more common personality type assessments, Myers-Briggs, the DISC assessment. There's also one that NASA uses called the Process Communication Model, and there are other examples that I can give. But the important thing to note about all of the personality type assessments that you might be familiar with is that they're all based on like external behaviors rather than what motivates us on the inside. And so, I have taken some of these assessments over the years. Like in high school, they had us do it. In college, they had us do it. I've taken some with work. Some of you probably have as well. This was the first time that I really have been involved in a personality type assessment that had to do more with motivations. And we really have to understand our core motivations in order to really get at the heart of who we are and why we do what we do. And so the Enneagram is a different take on personality type assessment. It proposes that there are 9 distinct personality types, major personality types, and then a gradient within each of those. And it's really based on motivations. So it's these 4 motivating characteristics. There's a core fear, which is the thing that you're always trying to prevent from happening in your life. The decisions that you make try to prevent that thing from happening. There's a core desire associated with your personality type, the thing that you're most striving for, and that your decisions that you make are based around. There's a core weakness that you're always trying to wrestle with. And then finally, there's a core longing, the sort of one sentence that summarizes what your heart most longs to hear. And, it's possible that you could, have that core longing met by your spouse if your spouse was to understand that and say those words to you. But really, the idea is that, on this earth, there's nothing that's going to fulfill us to that level. And really, you're not going to be able to fully fill that hole here on the earth. And that's what God is for. That's what we will eventually have, perfection in heaven. Let me actually back up. And so kind of the takeaway on this slide is that, for me at least, and I think probably for you as well, imagine if you and your spouse were completely vulnerable with each other, and you knew, based on each other's personality types and your gradient within that personality type, what your biggest fear was, kind of your core fear at the core of yourself, what your core desire was, and how might that impact your marriage. And we'll kind of go into that. We'll revisit that later in a few minutes here. And so, as an example, I'm going to use myself. So over the 6 to 9 months that I've been studying this, I have found that I most identify with the type 3 personality. So the type 3 personality is considered, the one-word summary for a type 3 is achiever. There's a one-word summary for each of the personality types, and you have it on your handout there. But anyway, so my core fear as a type 3 is being seen as incompetent, being thought of as someone who doesn't know all he's claiming to know, that sort of thing. My core desire is to be successful, to be admired by folks, and I didn't really understand that about myself until I started studying the Enneagram. But armed with that knowledge, I can look back in my history. I can look back 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, and I can really see how all of these pieces fit into the story of my life. And so it can be a really powerful tool to help you understand why you make the decisions that you do, why some things bother you, other things just roll off your back, no problem whatsoever. The core weakness of a type 3 is deceit, and that's outward deceit by embellishing the truth. If you're trying to appear successful, trying to appear competent, that you might embellish the truth a little bit about your background or about the projects that you're working on or whatever. But also inward deceit as well. Deceiving yourself that the image that you're projecting to others is your true self, when in fact you're so much more than that. And then finally, the core longing of a type 3, I struggled with this one a little bit. You're loved simply for being you. It is the thing that a type 3 is looking to hear the most, the thing that their heart is longing for. And while I'll say that that's true for me, I also really identify with the type 5 core longing, which is your needs are not a problem. So whatever your needs are, for me, my love language is physical touch. It doesn't come naturally to my wife. And so I would say, if that's something that I need, man, how amazing would it be for my wife to tell me, you know what, I've got it covered. You don't need to worry about it. Like, it's not a problem. And so that really speaks to me as well. But the Enneagram also has different flavors of each personality type. And so, for example, as a type 3, you look to the numbers around the type 3. And so adjacent to 3, there's a 2 and a 4. And so kind of on the gradient, on the spectrum of type 3, you kind of either, from the 3, identify a little bit more with the 2 or a little bit more with the 4. I personally identify a little bit more with the 2. And so that makes me what they call a 3-wing 2. And that's the flavor of personality type 3. That's a little bit more sociable, a little bit more active, a little bit more, likable to those around you. Whereas maybe a 3-wing 4 is a little bit more introverted, a little bit more withdrawn, maybe a little bit harder to get to know. And then when struggling though, I tend to be a little bit more competitive, and I especially see this at work, of course. I think a lot of us do. When you're struggling with your personality type, you tend to go in a different direction that more is more associated with one of the other personality types. And so actually the way that the Enneagram is built, and I can't remember, I guess it's not on the handout, but the way that the Enneagram is built, if we look back at the diagram on the previous slide, all of these numbers are connected with other numbers. And so as a type 3, I'm connected with the 9 and the 6. And so what does that mean? So that means that in times of stress, I kind of head toward the personality type of 9. And so that I take on some of, I guess, each of these types has positive qualities, negative qualities. I take on some of the negative qualities of a type 9. I get withdrawn, I lose motivation, and I can become indifferent to what's going on around me. And I definitely see that in myself. It was like a huge eye-opener to have this information in front of me and to really be able to identify, man, when I was really stressed out for 2 months getting ready for this design review at work, I just withdrew at home, I withdrew with my team at work, I lost some motivation, I procrastinated, which is not normally me at all. But in times of stress, in times of struggle, we revert to some of the worst qualities of some of these other types. But on the flip side, when I'm feeling supported, when I'm feeling like I'm in a supportive environment where I can grow, I actually head toward the most positive qualities of type 6. So I focus less on myself, I put my own needs aside, I focus more on others, and so it's, to me, the Enneagram is really rich in that you have your primary personality type, you have the gradient within that personality type, and you can see kind of where you head when you're struggling, and then when you're growing. Okay, so now I'm opening it up for you guys to start to maybe see if any of the types resonate with you. This isn't meant to be comprehensive. Again, it's like a high-level overview. If you're interested in this topic, after the end of this, there will be some books and a link for some more information. But again, it's been really, really helpful for my spouse and I to understand each other's types. And there's whole books on how type X communicates with type Y, how to build each other up when you're those personality types, that sort of thing. So first of all, it might be helpful to try and identify which quote-unquote triad you fall within. So there's kind of this gut triad that's personality types 8, 9, and 1. They tend to struggle with anger. They have a desire to see justice done. There's the heart triad that I fall squarely within. That's personality types 2, 3, and 4. They tend to struggle with shame, and they have a desire to be significant, for others to see them as significant. And then finally, the third triad there is the personality types 5, 6, 7. That's the head triad. They tend to struggle with anxiety, but they long for security. So by identifying, which of those maybe more resonates with you, then we can kind of sort of down select more easily what personality type you might have. Or if none of those really resonate with you, we can just go straight to the personality types. So I'm going to just do a quick overview here of the 9 different types. Again, you have all this information in front of you, and we can use it as a guide when we're doing the small groups. But type 8 is considered the challenger. Some of the words that describe a type 8 are assertive, self-confident, intense, big-hearted, but also on the flip side, they can be confrontational as well. The core fear there is being weak or powerless, and the desire is to protect yourself, protect your loved ones. So then I'm going to move on to the next column, and I'll do this for all of them. So the type 9 is the peacemaker. They're typically thoughtful, reassuring, receptive, accommodating. They can also be resigned to their situation. Their fear is being in conflict, being shut out, losing connection, and a desire of inner stability and peace of mind. So the next one's a type 1. This is actually my wife's type. And as tempting as it may be to type your spouse, to put them in a box based on their outward, I guess, what they do on the outside. It's really about motivation. That's the key thing to understand about Enneagram, is that it's really about internal motivation. And so it's not really possible to type someone else because you don't know what their motivations are. Only they really do. But anyway, my wife has found that she's a type 1, the reformer. So they are typically conscientious, orderly, appropriate, ethical. They can also be very judgmental. I don't know if any of your wives are that way. Probably just mine. Core fear is being wrong, evil, inappropriate. My wife definitely does not like being wrong. That's one of her fears. And then core desire is having integrity and being virtuous.
So I'm going to report it, David. So.
What was that?
It's just being reported, David. Maybe I didn't mean that. I love it. It's just for the guys. It's for the guys. This is awkward talk.
Okay. I don't know, it hits a little close to home. All right, so then I'm gonna kind of go a little bit faster here. So type 2 is the mentor. Type 3 would be the achiever. That's myself. Type 4 is the designer. And a lot of times when people find their type, sometimes they'll be confused. Sometimes they won't want to be that type. Another word for the type 1 is, another name for the type 1 is the perfectionist. And so sometimes, people will see, hey, I'm a type 1, but that's the perfectionist. I don't want to be a perfectionist. And they'll struggle with that a little bit. But the point is to really grow, to really get past some of those negative traits. We need to first understand what our type is and what is motivating us that's causing those negative traits. And then you can begin to work on those yourself and then also with your spouse. So finally, the last 3 are the investigator, the troubleshooter, and the enthusiast. So again, if any of these resonate with you, if any of those descriptive words resonate with you, we can talk about that a little bit more in the small groups. And then, as I said, a little bit later, there will be a link to a website that can give you some more information. So what's really the end goal here? Well, so really we want to have more self-awareness. This is where the action part comes in, right? We can say we want to be better husbands, we want to be better fathers, we want to be better spiritual leaders. But how can we do that unless we look inside ourselves and see what might be lacking in certain areas so we know where to focus? So that's where the action comes in. Everyone just tends to think that everyone else sees the world the same way that they do. But obviously that's just not true. And I have an example here. This isn't my own example. I wrote the example, but it doesn't have anything to do with my personal story. But, imagine that you grew up seeing your parents argue constantly about money. And there's never enough money for what needs to be done, that sort of thing. And so you might naturally assume, growing up in that environment, that money, security are the most important things to a spouse. And that it's your job to provide those things. And so you take on extra projects at work, you take on long hours, you do overtime, that sort of stuff, to provide the security for your spouse that you believe is the way that a husband should provide for his spouse. But what if your wife is a type 2? And type 2s crave feeling appreciated and wanted. But not only that, their core fear is abandonment. And so as you're working those extra hours at work, with the best of intentions, your wife is feeling more and more abandoned. And so can you maybe see how understanding what is the core fear underlying everything in your spouse, how that could be triggered, and how understanding that core fear might allow you to communicate better, might allow her to communicate to you, I understand why you're doing this. I understand why you feel like you need to provide security. But it's more important to me that you're here. And actually having that discussion rather than it just being an assumption that I want him here, he's not here, why wouldn't he know that, I want him to be here? And it's just never said, and it builds up and it builds up, and then, finally there's problems in the marriage. So that's an example for you. What's the end goal here? So if you and your spouse understand your own type and each other's type, you can all start to develop patience and empathy with the other when they behave in a way that doesn't match your worldview. You can identify what the other person is most longing to hear, and you can really focus your energies on trying to fulfill that for them. But you can also understand what their core fear is and try to avoid triggering that as well. And then the last point here is one that I already made, which is that it's not really possible to type other people. We actually had, I'm part of a community group, we met last night, and one of the people in the community group, we were talking about the Enneagram. One of the people actually said, all of my friends think I'm a type 2 because that's the image that I project, but really I'm a type 3. And so, again, it gets to the motivations, it gets to what's on the inside rather than what's outwardly projected. So here's some resources. There are a couple of books here that I have read. They're fantastic. I started with The Road Back to You. That was kind of an introduction to the Enneagram. Becoming Us is really more, at least in my view, it's a little bit more marriage focused. There's a whole section in the back, kind of an appendix, that goes through each of the types. Spends several pages on each type. How to better align yourself with the gospel based on your type. How to if your spouse is looking for better ways to communicate with you based on your type, or if you're looking on, for better ways to communicate with your spouse based on their type, that is listed in that section as well, some different tips. For example, for a type 3, one of the things that it says is they're very focused, they're very driven. If they're in the middle of working on a project, just try to create a peaceful environment for them, try to create a nice space where they can focus and try not to distract them. That spoke volumes to me. I'm like, that's exactly what I need. That's what I've always needed. And my wife is just, I'm in the office working on a project, and it's just like stream of consciousness, right? She comes in, she's like, hey, I didn't tell you about this thing that happened to me today. So her understanding that that's what I need in order to function well, that has been huge. And then finally, here's kind of the call to action. Even if you don't want to get the books, they're both available at the library. You can get them on Hoopla, some of the other library apps. But even if you don't want to do that stuff, because that's kind of a commitment to read a book, right? YourEnneagramCoach.com. So feel free to write that down. I think I'll send that out in an email after this. That has a free assessment that you can take, that you and your spouse can take. You can start with yourself. If you find it useful, you can maybe suggest to your wife that she take it as well. But it's a free test. It just drops you right into the test. You take the test. I think in order to see your results, you have to give them your email address at the end. But not only does it tell you your type, there are tons of resources on that website. Once you know what your type is, it really breaks down exactly all of the details for that type, and you can see if that really resonates with you. All right, so I think I did it. 25 minutes, not too bad. So small group questions here. So I'm going to leave this up on the screen. It again, names all of the 9 types. We have the handout in front of us. But here are the questions that I thought of. So the first one, was there a particular personality type that resonated with you? As I was going through those descriptive words for each type, was there one that resonated with you in particular? Have you been in a situation with your spouse where it was obvious that you guys had different worldviews? I don't know that any of us can identify with that, but so something that she did, you had no way of reconciling because it didn't match your way of thinking. Does your spouse seem to have a different core desire than you thought she did? For 10 years in my marriage, I've thought that my wife's core desire, what she wanted most from me, was this. But then through an argument or through some self-discovery, I've learned that actually she wants something completely different than I thought she did. So if that's the case, how have you or how might you course correct to try to fulfill what your wife is looking for? And I think that's it. Yes, that's the end here. So go ahead and open it up for the small groups.